Having dealt with the not-so-absolute transcendent absolute, we can now turn to the concept of the noosphere, which culminates in the omega. This is a particularly tricky subject given that the creators of the video game chose to translate an abstract concept into something tangible without offering clarification on its nature or essence. As described, the idea, originally tied to a socio-ecological abstraction, is reimagined in the game as a physical layer of information enveloping the Earth, connected to the thoughts of all living beings with cognitive capacities. Attempts to influence the noosphere result in a rupture, which manifests as the zone in the observable world. Judging by the statement from the representative of the sea consciousness, as well as the aforementioned trailer for the second installment of S.T.A.L.K.E.R, this rupture is expanding and the agents of the ultimate intelligence are allegedly trying to prevent such an outcome. If we were to tackle this problem head-on, I don't believe we'd get very far. Yet, as before, indirect inference may aid our interpretation. But to proceed in that way, it is important to first revisit the original idea of the noosphere. A look into Teilhard de Chardin's thoughts reveals that he employs it as an abstraction encompassing a developmental stratum on the tree of life, itself a metaphor or a conceptual model for exploring the evolution of living beings and describing the relationship between organisms. Naturally, everything presented so far implies that, within an orthogenetic vision, this tree is not merely a model of descent or kinship, but of development aiming toward a particular goal. Thus, for Teilhard, the emergence of thought and its progression marks the birth of a new member in that evolutionary sequence. Let us quote directly. Psychogenesis has led to man. Now it effaces itself, relieved or absorbed by another and a higher function, the engendering and subsequent development of the mind, in one word, noogenesis. The recognition and isolation of a new era in evolution, the era of noogenesis, obliges us to distinguish correlatively a support proportionate to the operation, that is to say, yet another membrane in the majestic assembly of telluric layers. A glow ripples outward from the first spark of conscious reflection. The point of ignition grows larger. The fire spreads in ever-widening circles, till finally the whole planet is covered with incandescence. Only one interpretation, only one name can be found worthy of this grand phenomena. Much more coherent and just as extensive as any preceding layer, it is really a new layer, the thinking layer, which, since its germination at the end of Tertiary period, has spread over and above the world of plants and animals. In other words, outside and above the biosphere, there is the noosphere. Its culmination, as previously explained, is represented by the omega point. On the other hand, Vernadsky approaches this question from the perspective of geological forces, just as he views the biosphere as a region of transformers that convert cosmic radiation into active energy in electrical, chemical, mechanical, thermal, and other forms. So too does he consider the evolutionary process to have given rise to a new geological force, that is, the scientific thought of humankind. Under the influence of scientific thought and human labor, the biosphere transitions into a new state, the noosphere. Consciousness then becomes a driving force of geological change, that is, with the emergence of the human species, the biosphere infinitely amplifies its geological power and transforms into the noosphere. Humanity drains swamps, bridges canyons, irrigates deserts, and fills the atmosphere with exhaust gases. Its footprint is visible from space, as city lights at night, like incidental manifestation of civilization, trace the contours of urban areas and the networks that connect them. The noosphere rests upon and reshapes both the biosphere and the geosphere. Given such a spectacular impact on the planet and in an effort to conceptually encompass it, the term Anthropocene gradually emerged to describe the geological epoch we inhabit. And though debates continue over the validity of that designation, Vernadsky's pioneering work has found its affirmation in the very way scientists now reflect on the planetary consequences of human social structures and of humanity as a whole. Without delving further into the development of the concept, it becomes clear that, aside from its name, the noosphere in the world of S.T.A.L.K.E.R diverges significantly from its original conceptualization. One could argue, however, that by embracing the idea of the sea consciousness as a manifestation of a phase transition and the attainment of the omega point, along with the effects it produces on the physical structure of the geosphere, the mental activity of a segment of the biosphere, and the general emergence of anomaly fields or wormholes, we arrive at a synthesis of the ideas of the two aforementioned thinkers. The fusion of the zone and the sea consciousness, as a noosphere culminating in omega, becomes the force of the reconfiguration of reality. Be that as it may, an additional link emerges, one found in the themes of Utopia and the role of science. In this sense, Vernadsky aligns with Chardin and Tsiolkovsky, finding in centralized coordination and the systematic application of science a cure for humanity's ailments and a path toward a brighter future. As he put it, through scientific thought and state-organized directed technology, humanity creates in the biosphere a new biogenic force which steers its reproduction and establishes favorable conditions for populating those parts of the biosphere where not only humans but, at times, no living species had ever dwelt. Naturally, this brings up the question of maximizing efficiency, to which Vernadsky responds with the idea of a universal state, thus echoing the motif of unity, whether in Teilhard's or Tsiolkovsky's sense, as well as the Caesar sword rejected by Christ but longed for by the Grand Inquisitor. In his own words, the idea of a unified political community of all humankind is becoming a reality only in our time, and even now merely as a realistic ideal whose fulfillment should not be doubted. It is clear that the realization of such unity is a necessary condition for the organization of the noosphere, and humanity will inevitably bring it about. Of course, such thoughts cannot be held against him, but from our perspective, once again, it is quite clear that the cost of centralization, which is a prerequisite for any form of universalism accessible to human capacities, is far too high. Vernadsky saw in science a positive potential, even though he acknowledged that it had been used for evil as well. What troubled him most was its fragmentation and subordination to narrow interests, as opposed to the cosmic heights to which it rightfully belongs. He found inspiration in utopian thinking, fully aware of the tension between the value of scientists for individual states and the necessity for their global organization. To quote, "Awareness of the fundamental importance of science for the good of humanity, of its immense power for both good and evil, is gradually and irreversibly transforming the scientific circles. Even in utopias, including ancient Hellenic ones like Plato's, state power was concentrated in the hands of scientists, a notion expressed to greater or lesser degrees in the vast majority of utopias. But the real increase in the state's valuation of scientists, which we can now observe, has had a strong impact on their scientific organization and is changing public opinion within the scientific community. This means that science often finds itself in the role of a handmaid tasked with serving the narrow interests of a particular community or party, directed toward goals shamefully misaligned with its true potential. Similar concerns also haunted Teilhard, who stated that the truth is that, as children of a transition period, we are neither fully conscious of nor in full control of the new powers that have been unleashed. Clinging to outworn habits, we still see in science only a new means of providing more easily the same old things. We put Pegasus between the traces, and Pegasus languishes unless he bolts with the wagon. But a moment will come, it is bound to, when man will be forced by disparity of the equipage to admit that science is not an accessory occupation for him, but an essential activity, a natural derivative of the overspill of energy constantly liberated by mechanization. It is impossible not to recognize the truth in these words, at least in the part that pertains to the depiction of our present. It's impossible not to feel a pang of sympathy when we see dubious figures parading through the public sphere, consciously or not offered to us as ideals by which we're expected to measure our own lives. And in contrast, we see brilliant minds in state institutions miserably underpaid and often forced to engage in meaningless work justified by the mystical veil of state reason or national interest. This becomes all the more tragic when we consider the silent evidence of a sea of brilliant minds who never even came close to appearing on our radar, let alone being recognized because they had to compromise simply to survive. How much more painful it becomes when we encounter a metaphor as beautiful as that of Pegasus hitched to a plow. And so, can we really blame the sea consciousness whose representative states that they immediately took control of those conducting the experiment and began with their own organization?
We immediately subordinated those who were conducting the experiment and assigned them to tasks we needed them to carry out.
This is a genuinely difficult question. Is it not justifiable for the most intelligent to govern? How can a fool pass judgment on a genius? Is it fair for their voices to carry equal weight? Can the average person truly appreciate a groundbreaking discovery that raises more questions than it answers, but heralds a shift in paradigm? We witnessed just such a moment at the very beginning of the roadside picnic, when a journalist questions Professor Pillman about the visit and the most important discovery scientists have made since it occurred. The shallow worldview that defines the journalist renders him incapable of grasping the depth of the professor's answer.
The fact of the visit is not only the most important discovery of the last 13 years, it's the most important discovery in human history. It doesn't matter who these aliens were. Doesn't matter where they came from, why they came, why they left so quickly, or where they vanished to since. What matters is that we now know for sure humanity is not alone in the universe. I'm afraid the Institute of Extraterrestrial Cultures could never make a more fundamental discovery.
In his response, the journalist immediately leaps to the question of the practical, turning to potential technological discoveries that could benefit humanity, citing a number of prominent experts who allegedly support that view. Notice the stark difference in perspective. While the professor's words shatter the anthropocentric worldview, concluding that the greatest question or burden of humanity, namely its cosmic uniqueness, has likely been resolved, his interlocutor's outlook remains shallowly tethered to humankind, seeking ways to profit from the event, identifying potential new methods of satisfying human needs as a more spectacular discovery than one that upends the entire previous paradigm. This same affliction is just as visible in the zone, where few stop to reflect upon its mystery or seemingly magical environment. Instead, people enter it either in pursuit of profit or in service of ideological goals. The sea consciousness is fully aware of this and thus creates the wish granter as an illusion that we, our desires and needs, are at the center of reality. This is why its calls are so powerful, insisting on our specialness, as noted earlier, stating that there can be only one, someone exceptional who deserves the reward, and that true fulfillment has a specific place and moment of realization.
Иди ко мне. Ты обретешь то, что заслуживаешь.
The same applies to the golden sphere in the novel. At the heart of a grand phenomenon and the vastness of our ignorance stands the belief that its appearance exists solely to fulfill our wishes. The narrowness of practicality, like necessity or the doom born of the need to survive, can act as a cage for thought, restraining humanity's greatest tool.